Chapter 1. The Last Refuge of the Desert Moon. The dust never settled on the barren surface of Sithra. 9. A remote desert moon orbiting a dead star in the outer rim of the Altair system. The sky was an eternal twilight, bruised with streaks of crimson and violet that bled into the swirling storms of ochre sand. Every breath of air was a gift, harsh and acrid, a mixture of fine particulate matter and traces of sulfurous gases that clung to every exposed surface. Sithra 9 had once been a flourishing mining colony, home to a diverse population of species drawn from across the galaxy by promises of precious minerals and rare elements buried beneath its cracked crust. But after decades of resource plunder and catastrophic solar flares, the colony had collapsed into ruin. The infrastructures rusted, the water wells ran dry, and the biodomes that once shimmered with lush green life stood as empty glass tombs under the bleeding sky. The coalition had long since abandoned Sithra 9, deeming it unprofitable and dangerous, a forgotten pocket of the galaxy's forgotten margins. Yet, in the heart of this forsaken wasteland, a small band of survivors clung stubbornly to life. They were the remnants of the Nyrith, a proud and ancient alien race with luminous sapphire skin and eyes that flickered like distant stars. Their culture had been built around water, family, and symbiotic relationships with the desert's resilient flora and fauna. But now, their numbers were dwindling rapidly. The raids by marauding scavenger clans, combined with the relentless scarcity of food and clean water, had turned their once vibrant villages into ghost towns. Starvation stalked their people like a shadow that could not be outrun. Amid the ruins of the old capital, beneath the skeletal remains of a shattered hydroprocessing tower, a figure knelt in the sand, her form framed against the dying light. She was tall, slender but muscular, her sapphire skin dulled by the persistent dust. Her eyes, large and luminescent even in the fading light, were rimmed with exhaustion and despair. She was the widow of a fallen warrior, the last of her lineage, and mother to 3 starving children whose hollow cheeks and sunken eyes haunted her every moment. Her name was Elira. For weeks, Elira had scoured the ruins and scape of Sithra 9 in desperate search of anything to feed her children, but the cruel desert offered nothing but bitterness and dust. The local fauna had either fled to deeper caves or succumbed to the harshness of the environment. Her water rations dwindled dangerously, and each day was a test of willpower and faith. It was said that the gods of the Nyrith had forsaken them, but Elira did not believe in abandonment. She believed in survival. She believed in hope, however fragile and elusive. One evening, as the twin moons began their slow rise over the dunes, casting pale, silvery light on the cracked sands, Elira spotted a faint glimmer on the horizon. At first, she thought it was a trick of the desert wind's mirages were common, cruel illusions that taunted the starving. But the light was steady, rhythmic, a sign of technology. A ship, a human ship. The arrival of humans on Sithra 9 was rare. The coalition considered the moon a backwater, and its dangerous terrain discouraged most travelers. Yet here it was. A sleek transport glided down through the swirling dust, its engines humming low and steady as it settled near the ruins. The hatch hissed open, and a solitary figure emerged, a human male, his features shadowed beneath a worn hood, eyes sharp with caution and fatigue. His name was Jalen Ward, a scavenger and trader whose path had been driven by desperation and the lure of lost tech. But as he stepped onto the harsh sand, he found himself not in a dead zone, but in the midst of a tragedy, still breathing, struggling. Elira approached him cautiously, her movements graceful but wary. Her voice was soft, edged with the roughness of countless dry days. "Human," she called out, her accent thick but clear. "I am Elira, widow of the Nyrith. My children starve. Our people perish. Please, feed my children. I will do anything. Anything." Jalen's eyes flickered with surprise and suspicion. The galaxy was full of desperate pleas, and many were traps or desperate cries for favors that came with impossible costs. But something in Elira's gaze pierced through the dust and the years, a raw, primal truth that called to the part of him buried under the layers of cynicism. He lowered his hood and stepped forward. The heat of the desert air mixed with the faint scent of her skin like minerals and forgotten rain. He listened as she spoke of dwindling water supplies, of the collapse of their shelters, of the nights spent whispering lullabies to children too weak to dream. She told him of the old ways, of the sacred wells now dry, of the once abundant groves of flame fruit that had withered under the relentless sun. Her story was not just of hunger, but of a culture unraveling at the seams. Moved, but wary, Jalen offered what supplies he carried: dried rations, purified water capsules, medical nanites. The gratitude in her eyes was immediate, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was a drop in a vast, starving ocean. Days passed as Jalen and Elira forged an uneasy alliance. The children, their tiny hands clutching the precious supplies, slowly regained color in their cheeks. Elira shared what she knew of hidden oases beneath the dunes, old tunnels carved by ancestors that might still hold water reserves. Jalen used his equipment to map the underground passages, their combined hope growing like a fragile seed in the wasteland. But this fragile peace was not without peril. News of their partnership spread quickly, carried by scavengers and the wind alike. Raiders, twisted by greed and hunger, soon marked their camp as a prize. The desert had no mercy for the weak, and every gift came at a price. One night, under the veil of a violent sandstorm, their camp was attacked. Elira fought fiercely, her warrior instincts unforgotten even in her weakened state, but the raiders outnumbered them. Jalen, wielding a makeshift plasma rifle, covered their retreat as the children were bundled into the remains of a rusted cargo pod. When dawn broke, the sands had swallowed the battle, but the scars remained. Elira's plea had become a cry not just for food, but for survival, for protection, and for a future where her children might one day live free of hunger. Jalen looked at her with a mix of respect and determination. This was no longer just a trade. It was a pact, a commitment to a mother's desperate hope and the stubborn heart of a stranger willing to stand against the dying light. The desert wind carried their resolve far and wide. The sun dipped lower behind the fractured horizon of Sithra, 9, casting a dying orange glow that seeped through the ever-present haze of dust. Elira's feet, bare against the burning sand, left shallow prints that would soon be erased by the endless winds. Her children, 3 small figures huddled together beneath a tattered canopy of salvaged metal sheets, watched her return with wide, hollow eyes that flickered with the faintest flickers of hope and hunger. Their ribs showed too clearly beneath taut, dusty skin, their movements slow, weighed down by the relentless ache of starvation. The youngest, barely 3 cycles old, clung to a cracked doll fashioned from scraps of discarded tech, its faded blue eyes reflecting the harsh light of the twin moons that began to rise. Elira's throat was raw from days of rationed speech and prayers whispered to empty skies. The weight of loss pressed heavily on her shoulders, the loss of her husband in the Marauders' raid, the loss of their village, and now the suffocating loss of the last shreds of normalcy she had tried to hold for her children. In her culture, the bonds between family were sacred, unbreakable ties woven by shared water and stories sung beneath the stars. To fail her children was to fail her ancestors, to break the lineage of survival etched into her very being. And yet, here she was, standing at the edge of oblivion, pleading to a human stranger with desperation that transcended language and species. Jalen sat quietly in the shadow of his ship's hull, the harsh desert wind tugging at his worn jacket and the folds of his cloak. He had traveled far from his homeworld, a scavenger chasing whispers of lost technology and forgotten treasures. The galaxy was a cruel place, where every transaction was measured in risks and debts, and survival was the only currency that mattered. When he saw Elira approach, he was instinctively wary. Many travelers on dead worlds were fraught with danger or desperate schemes. But the sincerity in her gaze was unmistakable, a raw purity that cut through the hardened layers he had built around himself. He listened as she told her story, the cadence of her voice carrying the weight of pain and hope. Her words painted vivid images of a world once abundant, where crystal-clear springs bubbled beneath the desert floor, where children played beneath the shade of flame-fruit groves, and warriors danced in the light of their ancestors' blessings. Now, those memories were like distant echoes, drowned by the harsh reality of drought, famine, and relentless raids. Elira described the fierce pride of her people, a strength forged in the crucible of survival, now tempered by the brutal need to protect what little remained. She spoke of her husband's last stand, of how he died defending their home, leaving her to face a future she had never imagined, a future where she alone was responsible for the survival of her lineage. Jalen's hand instinctively rested on the grip of his plasma rifle, a gesture of both protection and caution. Yet, beneath his guarded exterior, something stirred deep, almost forgotten part of himself that yearned to help, to save, to redeem. He opened his supply pack and handed over the water capsules and nutrient packs he carried, small, precious gifts in a place that had none. The children's faces brightened, their eyes momentarily filled with wonder and gratitude. But Jalen knew this was but a fleeting reprieve. The desert was vast and merciless, and what little they had would soon vanish like the last drops of rain on parched earth. Over the following cycles, Jalen and Elira forged an unlikely partnership, bound by necessity and shared purpose. They moved cautiously through the ruins of the old colony, navigating the labyrinth of collapsed tunnels and buried water caches. Elira's knowledge of the ancient irrigation systems and hidden oases was invaluable, and Jalen's technical skills and scavenging expertise complemented her survival instincts. Together, they discovered fractured conduits that still carried faint traces of water and remnants of biodomes where algae and lichens stubbornly clung to life. Each find was a small victory, a fragile thread in the tapestry of survival they wove for the children and the remnants of the Nyrith. Yet, as hope kindled within their makeshift sanctuary, the desert's dangers multiplied. Scavenger raiders, drawn by rumors of supplies and survivors, prowled closer with every passing day. Their brutal tactics and overwhelming numbers forced Jalen and Elira to fortify their position, improvising defenses from scrap and salvage tech. Nights were restless, punctuated by distant gunfire and the eerie howls of mutated desert predators that had adapted to the poisoned soil. The children's sleep was haunted by nightmares, and Elira's heart ached with the knowledge that safety was a fleeting illusion. One particularly brutal night, as a fierce sandstorm howled outside their fragile shelter, the raiders struck. Their attack was swift and merciless, a coordinated strike that tore through their defenses with ruthless efficiency. Elira fought with the ferocity of a mother bear, wielding a plasma blade salvaged from an old security drone, her movements a blur of precision and desperation. Jalen covered their retreat, firing bursts of charged plasma that lit the stormy darkness in brilliant flashes. Amidst the chaos, the children were bundled into the ruins of an old cargo container, shielded by Talus-like drones Jalen had jury-rigged to their defense. The battle was brutal, and the aftermath left scars etched deep into their bodies and souls. As dawn broke over the battered remains of their camp, the storm subsided, revealing a desert littered with debris and silence. Elira knelt beside her children, tears mixing with the dust on her skin, gratitude and sorrow intertwined. Jalen, bruised but unbowed, looked toward the horizon where distant lights flickered, signs that the galaxy had not forgotten them entirely. Their survival was uncertain, their future precarious, but in that moment, beneath the vast expanse of alien stars, a fragile promise took root, that no matter the cost, they would endure. That hope, like water in the desert, was worth fighting for. The bitter wind swept across the scorched dunes, carrying with it the faint scent of rust and desolation. The remnants of their shattered camp lay buried beneath a fine blanket of dust, the scattered bones of their brief resistance half covered by swirling sand. Elira sat hunched near the shelter's remains, her eyes locked on the fading silhouettes of her children nestled inside the rusted cargo hold, their fragile breathing a precious symphony in the stillness. Her skin was cracked, dust-covered, and streaked with dried tears, but her spirit remained fiercely unbroken. She traced her fingers over the worn doll clutched by her youngest, whispering promises that transcended language, promises of survival, of revenge, and of hope. Jalen moved silently beside her, a sentinel bound not by duty but by choice. His gaze, once hardened by years of solitary scavenging and cold bargains, now bore the warmth of a protector awakened. In the merciless expanse of Sithra, 9, amid ruins where only the desperate lingered, he had found something worth defending. The connection between them was tenuous, built on shared hardship and mutual reliance. Yet in that desolation, it shimmered like a fragile beacon. They spoke little. Words were too heavy, too laden with the ghosts of the past. But their actions told the story of two strangers joined by circumstance, entwined in a silent vow to reclaim a future for those who had none. As night deepened, the twin moons cast an eerie glow over the alien landscape, their pale light filtering through the fractured dome of the cargo hold. Inside, the children stirred, weak smiles breaking through the veil of starvation. Elira's heart clenched with bittersweet relief. Each breath drawn was a victory, each flicker of life a testament to their will. She knew the road ahead was fraught with peril. The desert held many dangers, from ruthless raiders to the unforgiving elements. But she also knew they could not give up. The blood of her ancestors ran strong, and with Jalen's steady presence, a sliver of hope took root. Days bled into nights, and together they scavenged the ruins for hidden caches, deciphering the faded maps and long-forgotten schematics that whispered secrets of water reservoirs and shelter systems buried beneath the sands. Elira taught Jalen the sacred rituals of her people, songs sung to coax moisture from the barren earth, rites to honor the spirits of the lost wells, and the sacred dance of the flame-fruit harvest, a fruit that once flourished and sustained their kind, but had all but vanished under the relentless sun. Each discovery was a lifeline, a thread woven into their fragile tapestry of survival. Yet, the desert's grip tightened. Scars of old wars and forgotten betrayals marred the landscape, and the past was never far behind. Raiders, cruel and cunning, stalked the outskirts of their territory, driven by hunger and greed, their faces twisted into snarls beneath makeshift helmets and scavenged armor. One evening, as a crimson storm brewed on the horizon, Elira sensed their approach. Shadows moving with predatory precision, the clatter of weapons and low guttural threats echoing through the canyons. She steeled herself, heart pounding, as Jalen primed his plasma rifle. The battle was fierce, a desperate clash between hope and annihilation beneath the swirling sands. When the dust settled, the cost was clear. Their sanctuary was shattered, the children shaken but alive, and the raiders driven off with fierce determination. Elira's resolve burned brighter than ever. They would endure. They would rebuild. And they would find a way off this forsaken world. Chapter 2. The Human's Promise. The sun rose slowly over Sithra, 9, its first light casting long shadows across the battered ruins and revealing the scars of the night's violence. Elira sat beside the remains of their shelter, tending to her children as Jalen examined the damage to his ship, a battered transport that had seen better days but still held the promise of escape. The bond between the two had deepened, forged in fire and tempered by shared purpose. Jalen's quiet strength offered a new kind of hope, and Elira found herself leaning on him in ways she hadn't thought possible. Their alliance was more than survival. It was a pact to fight against the despair that threatened to consume them. Jalen shared stories of distant worlds, of bustling cities where water flowed freely and technology could heal wounds thought permanent. To Elira, those tales were like legends, distant and unreachable, yet they stirred a yearning deep within her, a desire to take her children beyond the dying sands, beyond the endless hunger. But the desert held its own secrets, and Sithra, 9, was far from done with them. As they prepared to depart, a transmission crackled through Jalen's comm, a fragmented plea for help from a hidden outpost on the moon's far side. The message was faint, distorted by interference and time, but the desperation was unmistakable. A colony, survivors like themselves, clinging to life in the shadows of the dead world. The choice was clear. They could escape, leave the dying moon behind, or they could answer the call, offering aid to others like them, forging a community from the scattered remnants of hope. Elira looked to her children, then to Jalen, and with a quiet resolve said, "We do not run from our people. We carry their fire forward." Together, they set a course deeper into the wilds of Sithra, 9, their hearts bound by the promise of survival, the weight of loss, and the flickering hope of redemption. The journey to the distant outpost carved a slow, grueling path across the fractured landscape of Sithra, 9, where every mile was a battle against the relentless sun, biting winds, and the ever-present threat of collapse. Jalen piloted the battered transport with practiced precision, navigating through crumbling canyon walls and dodging shifting sand dunes that threatened to swallow them whole. Elira sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes flickering between the navigation displays and the small cluster of children nestled beneath the patchwork shelter at the rear of the ship. Their fragile breaths came in shallow rhythms, a haunting testament to the toll the desert had taken on them and the urgency that propelled their mission. The transmission that had called to them was fragmented but insistent, a distress beacon activated by a handful of survivors trapped in a hidden cavern network deep beneath the moon's far side. The message spoke of dwindling supplies, failing life support systems, and an overwhelming sense of isolation that gnawed at their dwindling hope. For Elira, it was not just a call for help. It was a summons to rekindle the fractured spirit of her people, to unite the scattered remnants of the Nyrith against the suffocating darkness. For Jalen, it was an opportunity to wield purpose beyond mere survival, to fight alongside a mother's fierce will and the fragile promise of rebuilding a future. Hours bled into cycles as the transport rumbled across the moonscape, each shift of terrain peeling back layers of the forgotten world. The radio chatter between the outpost and the transport crackled with static and urgency, each word a lifeline thrown across the void. Upon arrival, the cavern entrance loomed like a yawning wound in the earth, half hidden by shattered rock and dust storms that churned endlessly like ghosts of the past. Inside, the cool darkness was a balm and a threat, filled with the whispers of desperate voices and the faint hum of dying machinery struggling to cling to life. Elira moved through the cramped tunnels with a grace born of tradition and hardship, her presence a beacon of comfort to the weary survivors huddled within. The outpost was a fragile oasis, walls lined with biofiltration units patched together from salvaged tech, hydroponic gardens struggling beneath flickering lights, and narrow chambers where sick and wounded rested beneath makeshift shelters. Children with the same haunting eyes as hers clung to parents, their faces gaunt but filled with cautious hope. Jalen's hands were steady as he repaired failing generators and rationed medical supplies, his pragmatic calm grounding the chaotic hope around him. Together, they shared stories and strategies, weaving a fragile web of survival that stretched across the cavernous labyrinth. Elira spoke of old rites to call forth the desert's hidden water, of sacred rituals that honored the ancestors' bond with the land and sky. Jalen listened, fascinated by the depth of history and resilience etched into her every word. The survivors rallied around them, drawing strength from the union of human ingenuity and Nyrith tradition, a spark against the encroaching void. But even in the sanctuary of the caves, shadows lurked. The raiders that haunted the surface had begun to probe deeper, driven by the scent of life and resources. Their incursions became more frequent, marked by skirmishes in the narrow tunnels and the ominous echoes of distant explosions. Elira's resolve hardened as she took up the mantle of defender, training survivors in guerrilla tactics and rallying their courage with the fire of her people's enduring spirit. Jalen adapted their technology, rigging improvised defenses and creating communication relays that threaded through the labyrinthine passages like veins of resistance. The nights were long and filled with tension, punctuated by whispered prayers and the soft sobs of children haunted by loss. Yet, beneath the fear, a fragile hope took root. It promised that together, they might reclaim a measure of peace, might kindle a future where hunger and death were no longer the only constants. Elira's eyes, once clouded with despair, began to shine with a fierce determination mirrored in Jalen's steady gaze. The human and the alien, bound by fate and shared struggle, stood as pillars against the gathering storm. As the twin moons cast their silver light through cracks in the cavern ceiling, Elira knelt beside her children, brushing dust from their tired faces. The hunger that gnawed at their bellies was a cruel reminder of the harsh world outside. But here, in the fragile warmth of the outpost, there was something worth fighting for. She whispered a vow beneath the alien stars, a promise that the flames of her people's legacy would not be extinguished. Not while she lived, not while her children breathed. Outside, the desert winds howled a relentless chorus of the forgotten. But inside, in the heart of the darkness, a new light flickered. The fragile calm of the cavern outpost was shattered not by force, but by revelation. Days after their arrival, Jalen and Elira discovered signs that something beneath Sithra 9 was stirring, a presence that did not belong to the starving survivors or the ruthless raiders. It began subtly, faint tremors beneath the soil, electromagnetic disturbances that scrambled their communication devices, and shadows that seemed to flicker just beyond sight in the twisting tunnels. The outpost scanners picked up unexplained energy readings, pulsing rhythms that echoed ancient signals long erased from coalition databases. The desert moon was awakening. Elira's people had old legends of spirits buried deep beneath the sand's guardians or curses left by the ancestors, forces both protective and vengeful. But these signs were different, rooted in technology as much as myth. Some survivors whispered of the sleeping ones, giant biomechanical constructs sealed within the planet's crust, their purpose lost to time but their power intact. As Elira pored over the faded glyphs and data logs salvaged from the ruins, a chilling realization took hold. The outpost sat atop one such ancient vault. The discovery ignited a spark of hope and fear in equal measure. If the vault held resources, water, energy, or weapons, it could turn the tide for the scattered survivors. But if its defenses remained active, or worse, if something hostile slumbered inside, the consequences could be catastrophic. Jalen's expertise became crucial as he coordinated salvage and reconnaissance missions, venturing into labyrinthine tunnels that snaked deeper beneath the surface. Each expedition revealed fractured corridors lined with advanced but deteriorating machinery, walls etched with unfamiliar symbols that shimmered faintly under the outpost's portable lights. The deeper they ventured, the more the air hummed with latent energy, thick with the weight of long-forgotten purpose. One evening, as the crimson dusk bled across the sky, Jalen returned from an exploration with an artifact cradled carefully in his hands, a crystalline device pulsating with soft blue light. It was a power core, unlike anything the Coalition had cataloged, seemingly capable of generating vast energy with minimal input. The implications were staggering. Could this be the key to restoring life to the dead moon? To reigniting the shattered hopes of the Nirith? But that night, unease settled over the camp like a suffocating shroud. Elira awoke to whispers carried on the desert wind, soft voices that spoke in the ancient tongue of her ancestors, warning of awakening things better left buried. The children stirred restlessly, and the survivors huddled close, shadows lengthening with the approaching storm. Somewhere beneath their feet, the vault stirred in response to their intrusion, ancient defenses flickering to life. When the raiders struck again, it was with new ferocity. Their assaults no longer random but coordinated, exploiting weaknesses in the outpost's defenses that could only have been known by someone or something with intimate knowledge of the tunnels. Elira and Jalen fought side by side, their bond forged not just in necessity, but in unyielding determination. The battles were brutal, each skirmish pushing them closer to the brink. But through every trial, the survivors rallied, their spirit unbroken, fueled by the promise of a future reclaimed. Amidst the chaos, a stranger arrived, a wanderer cloaked in dust and secrets, bearing knowledge of the vault's true nature and warnings of an ancient power that could either save or destroy them all. His eyes held the weight of countless suns, and his words carved a path between hope and despair. The desert moon was no mere wasteland. It was a crucible of forgotten technology and lingering shadows, a nexus where the fate of many races intertwined. Elira listened, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. The fight for survival had become a struggle for legacy, for the very soul of Sithra 9. And she, a starving widow with nothing but love for her children, stood at the center of it all. Chapter 3: Shadows over the Oasis. The outpost had transformed from a fragile refuge into a bastion of resistance, its walls fortified with scavenged tech and the unbreakable will of its defenders. Under Elira's guidance, the survivors adapted quickly, melding ancient rituals with modern ingenuity to craft defenses that bent light and warped sound, confusing enemies and predators alike. Jalen's technical skills blossomed in the crucible of necessity, his hands shaping salvaged components into weapons and sensors that whispered of hope in the face of oblivion. But the shadows lurking beneath Sithra 9 were patient and cunning. The vault's defenses, ancient and relentless, began to manifest in unexpected ways, shimmering energy barriers that flickered across tunnel entrances, robotic sentinels long dormant but now stirring to life, and cryptic holographic warnings that spoke of betrayal and sacrifice. The deeper truth of the moon's buried legacy unfolded like a dark tapestry, revealing alliances shattered and enemies born from desperation. One night, as the twin moons cast ghostly light over the dunes, Elira and Jalen stood on the outpost's ramparts, eyes scanning the horizon where distant lights flickered like fireflies. The air was thick with tension, the silence before a storm. Their conversation was quiet, but laden with unspoken fears and fierce determination. "We cannot hold this place forever," Jalen said, voice low but steady. "The vault's power is growing, and with it, the dangers. We need a plan not just to survive, but to take control." Elira nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Our people have endured the worst the desert could throw at us. Now, we must face the shadows with open eyes. For my children, for all of us." As they turned to rally their people, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath them, a pulse of energy that rippled through the outpost and echoed across the barren plains. From the depths of the vault, a new threat was awakening, one that would test the limits of their courage and the strength of their fragile alliance. The fight for Sithra 9 had only just begun. The desert night on Sithra 9 was a tapestry woven with silence and whispers, broken only by the distant howl of wind stirring the sands into restless waves. Beneath the twin moon's pale gaze, the outpost stood resolute, a stubborn beacon of life amid the unyielding desolation. But beneath the surface, deep within the bowels of the ancient vault, something ancient and cold began to stir, like a long-forgotten predator waking from a timeless slumber. The faint hum of latent energy rippled through the tunnels, threading through the fractured rock, like veins of power awakening after millennia. Elira moved with a warrior's grace through the labyrinthine corridors of the outpost, her steps light but purposeful. The weight of leadership settled heavy on her shoulders, but she bore it with unyielding resolve. The faces of her children, pale but determined, fueled the fire that burned in her sapphire eyes. The survivors gathered around makeshift fires and patched shelters, their whispered prayers mingling with the hum of salvaged machinery. The stranger known only as Kale had shared knowledge that transformed hope into action, revealing that the vault was more than a relic. It was a fortress, a repository of technology and secrets that could shift the balance of power in the Outer Rim. But it was also a trap, its defenses insidious and deadly. Jalen worked tirelessly alongside the engineers and scavengers, his fingers nimble as he rewired ancient circuits and calibrated sensors to detect the vault's restless guardians. Every day brought new discoveries, walls that shifted to seal passages, holographic projections warning of past betrayals, and robotic sentinels whose cold eyes flickered with faint intelligence. The survivors learned to move like shadows, avoiding patrols of dormant machines awakened by their presence. Each encounter was a deadly dance, a test of wit and courage that left scars visible and invisible. One evening, as the desert sky darkened and stars burned cold and distant, Elira convened a council beneath the outpost's central dome, a place where relics of the past flickered faintly on rusted consoles, and ancient glyphs cast eerie shadows. The survivors gathered, their faces etched with fatigue and determination. Elira's voice, steady and resolute, cut through the heavy air. "We are the last of our kind on this moon," she began, eyes sweeping the crowd. "But we are not defeated. The vault is our past, but also our future. We must unlock its secrets before the shadows consume us. Together, we can turn this place from a tomb into a home." Jalen stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "The technology here is unlike anything the Coalition has seen. If we can harness it, we could not only survive, but thrive. But we must be cautious. The vault's defenses are programmed to destroy intruders without mercy." The room fell into thoughtful silence, broken only by the soft hum of the outpost's life support systems. Plans were forged, alliances cemented, and preparations made for a perilous expedition into the deepest chambers of the vault. Elira and Jalen would lead the mission, venturing into the heart of the ancient fortress where the secrets and dangers were greatest. As they descended into the shadowed depths, the air grew colder, thick with the weight of history and forgotten wars. The walls shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with their footsteps, guiding them deeper into the vault's labyrinth. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant echoes of shifting metal and the faint whisper of unseen mechanisms awakening. Suddenly, a low rumble reverberated through the corridors, a warning that the vault itself was aware of their presence. Elira tightened her grip on her plasma blade, her senses sharpening as the shadows around them seemed to coalesce into forms that flickered between solid and spectral. The guardians of the vault had risen, ancient constructs forged in the fires of a bygone era, their purpose singular, to protect and to annihilate. The survivors fought with desperation and skill, their movements honed by months of survival and the fierce will to protect their fragile community. Jalen's makeshift weapons blazed in the darkness, piercing the hulls of the robotic sentinels, while Elira's blade danced with lethal precision, cutting through steel and energy alike. The battle was brutal and unrelenting, each victory hard-won and fleeting. As the dust settled and the echoes faded, Elira and Jalen pressed onward, guided by the cryptic inscriptions that hinted at the vault's ultimate secret, a power source capable of rejuvenating the moon and restoring life to its desolate surface. But unlocking that power came with a price, and the deeper they delved, the more the line between ally and adversary blurred. In the heart of the vault, beneath layers of forgotten technology and sacred rites, they would confront the true legacy of Sithra. 9. A legacy forged in sacrifice, betrayal, and the unyielding hope of a starving widow willing to do anything to save her children. The cavern's oppressive silence was punctuated only by the steady drip of water echoing off ancient stone, a rhythmic pulse like a slow heartbeat beneath the moon's desolation. Elira's eyes adjusted to the dim bioluminescence that traced veins of crystal in the wall's faint glimmers of life buried deep beneath Sithra 9's surface. The further into the vault she ventured, the heavier the weight of history pressed upon her chest, as if the very air was saturated with the memory of those who had come before, warriors and scholars alike, whose blood had seeped into the foundation of this place, and whose hopes had been buried alongside. Jalen moved beside her with quiet determination, the hum of his repaired scanner filling the air, weaving through the silence like a tether between the past and the precarious present. The device flickered intermittently, decoding the alien glyphs that crawled across the wall's language and symbols so old they seemed almost alive, pulsing with a strange energy that resonated with the helmet Elira still carried. It was as if the vault itself was alive, its sentience locked away behind layers of defense and secrecy, waiting for the right combination of will and knowledge to awaken it. Every shadow twisted with potential threats. The ancient sentinels, once dormant for millennia, stirred beneath layers of dust and corrosion. Their reactivation was subtle at first, glowing red eyes flickering to life in the periphery, the soft whirring of servos and the faint scent of burning circuitry. These mechanical guardians were built not merely to defend, but to erase any who dared disturb the sanctity of the vault's secrets. The survivors had become intruders in a world they barely understood, and the vault was no place for mercy. As they descended deeper, the corridors narrowed, and the oppressive silence was replaced by the distant echo of rhythmic pounding and unnerving cadence that seemed to vibrate through the very bedrock. The sound grew louder with each step, accompanied by a rising hum that prickled the hairs on their arms. Then, suddenly, the path ahead burst into light as massive gates, inscribed with pulsating glyphs, began to unfold like the petals of a mechanical flower, revealing a vast chamber filled with crystalline structures that hummed with raw, untamed energy. Elira's breath caught as she stepped forward, while battling with caution. At the center of the chamber floated an orb, a pulsating core of pure energy, encased in a lattice of intricate alien machinery. The power it radiated was both beautiful and terrifying, a source capable of rejuvenating the entire moon or unleashing devastation on an unimaginable scale. The legends spoke of this as the heart of the oasis, the life-giving force that once sustained the Nyrith and their allies before the cataclysm fractured their world. But it was guarded. From the shadows emerged figures, ancient constructs, tall and elegant, their forms woven from gleaming metals and organic materials, eyes burning with cold blue light. They moved with precision and grace, encircling the chamber like spectral sentinels. These were the Vault Guardians, programmed not only to protect, but to judge. Their voices resonated in harmonic unison, speaking in the long-forgotten tongue of the Builders, words that echoed in Elira's mind with clarity beyond understanding. You who awaken the heart, they intoned, proclaim your worth. For only those pure of purpose and unyielding in spirit may wield the power to restore or destroy. Elira stepped forward, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. I am Elira, widow and mother. I seek only to save my children, my people, and this dying world. Judge me as you will. The Guardians paused, their eyes scanning her, weighing her words and the truth behind them. Then, with a flicker of light, they parted, allowing access to the orb. Jalen approached cautiously, extending a hand to the console that interfaced with the heart. As he did, the energy pulsed, reacting to his presence, weaving ancient data streams into his mind. Visions flooded him past catastrophes, alliances forged and broken, and the promise of renewal. But with the gift came a warning. The vault was not merely a source of power, it was a beacon. Its activation sent ripples across the galaxy, signals reaching far beyond Sithra 9's orbit. And with those signals came Eyes Watchers whose intentions were unknown, but whose power was undeniable. Elira and Jalen exchanged a grim look. Their struggle was far from over. The vault's secrets were now theirs to protect, but the shadows gathering outside whispered of an approaching storm, one that would test the limits of their resolve and the strength of the fragile community they had fought so hard to build. The heart of the oasis was alive, and its awakening would change everything. Chapter 4: The Rising Storm. The desert sky burned with a violent palette of blood red and storm gray as the twin moons receded beyond the horizon, leaving the battered outpost vulnerable beneath the encroaching tempest. The air thrummed with tension, thick and suffocating, as if the very atmosphere bore the weight of impending conflict. Elira stood atop the highest vantage point she could find, the jagged rocks beneath her feet cold and unyielding, her eyes scanning the barren wastes that stretched endlessly before her, a sea of cracked earth and shifting sands dotted with the scattered remnants of forgotten war machines and rusting hulls half buried in dunes. Around her, the survivors moved with urgent purpose, their faces etched with fatigue but burning with a newfound fire. The vault's activation had stirred something ancient and unforgiving beneath the surface of Sithra 9, awakening forces that had slumbered in silence for untold centuries. The scattered raider clans, once disorganized and fractured, had begun to coalesce, driven by rumors of the outpost's power and the lure of the heart of the oasis. The desert winds carried their war cries and the clang of makeshift weapons forged from scrap and desperation. Jalen approached, his expression grim but resolute, the weight of countless battles reflected in the tight set of his jaw. His hands were stained with oil and blood, a testament to the harsh reality of survival on this forsaken moon. He unrolled a crude map, its edges frayed, and pointed toward the distant ridges where the first signs of the raider warbands had been spotted. They're coming in force, he said, voice low but steady. They want the vault. If they take it, it's not just us who'll suffer. This place will become a nightmare for everyone in the system. Elira nodded, the firelight flickering in her sapphire eyes. Then we fight, not just for ourselves, but for the future of our children, for the legacy of the Nyrith. We will stand, and we will not fall. The hours before the storm were a flurry of preparation. Makeshift barricades were reinforced, weapons scavenged and modified, and the survivors drilled into their roles with fierce determination. Children were hidden away in the deepest tunnels, their innocent faces a stark contrast to the grim resolve that settled over the adults. Elira moved among them, offering words of encouragement and steel, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. As the first thunder rolled across the desert, a massive dust cloud appeared on the horizon, the unmistakable sign of an approaching force. The raiders advanced like a living tide, their armor patchworked and menacing, faces obscured by fearsome masks and grim resolve. Their numbers dwarfed the defenders, but Elira and Jalen knew that courage and strategy could turn the tide where brute strength failed. The battle that followed was fierce and unrelenting. Plasma fire carved streaks of deadly light through the swirling dust, while the roar of explosions and the clash of blades echoed across the desolate plains. Elira fought with the ferocity of a mother protecting her young, every movement a dance of survival and defiance. Jalen covered her flank, his sharp aim and tactical mind carving paths through the chaos. Yet, amidst the blood and fire, something deeper stirred, a realization that this was no ordinary raid. The enemy was not only after resources, but the power locked within the vault, an ancient technology that could reshape worlds. The very ground trembled as the vault's defenses activated, unleashing energy barriers and automated turrets that turned the tide against the invaders. In the aftermath, as the dust settled and the first light of dawn bathed the battered outpost in a fragile glow, Elira stood once more on the ridge, her children safe but the cost heavy in her heart. The storm had passed, but the war for Sithra IX's future was only beginning. Beyond the horizon, unseen and patient, forces watched and waited the true challenge yet to come. The dawn broke pale and uncertain over the scarred landscape of Sithra IX, casting long shadows across the ruined outpost as survivors moved with wary urgency through the aftermath of battle. The ground was scorched, littered with twisted metal and smoldering debris, the acrid scent of plasma fire and burnt ozone hanging heavy in the air. Elira's breath came steady but deep, her sapphire eyes scanning the horizon where the remnants of the raider warbands had retreated like a bruised tide ebbing back into the desert wastes. Despite the hard-won victory, the toll weighed heavily both in lives and in spirit. Children huddled beneath patched shelters, some too weak to rise, and the survivors nursed wounds as much of the flesh as of the soul. Jalen moved alongside her, his hands rough but steady as he helped distribute water and medical supplies, his mind already calculating the resources left and the defenses needing repair. The vault's ancient technology had fought alongside them, a silent guardian whose full power they still struggled to understand. Yet, with every triumph came the chilling awareness that this was only the beginning. The activation of the heart of the oasis had sent ripples far beyond their broken moon, awakening not just dormant machines, but alerting shadowy factions who coveted the vault's secrets for far darker purposes. As the outpost leaders gathered in the central chamber, beneath the cracked dome where soft bioluminescent light danced across the walls, Elira stood at the forefront, her voice steady despite the weight of responsibility. She spoke not only as a mother, but as the reluctant leader of a fractured people united by survival. "We have won this battle," she began, "but the war is far from over. The raiders were only the first wave. We have stirred something ancient, something vast. The vault's power is a beacon, and many eyes turn to it. We must prepare not just to defend, but to secure our future." Her words hung heavy in the charged silence. Among those gathered was Kale, the enigmatic stranger whose knowledge of the vault had proven invaluable, yet whose motives remained shrouded in mystery. His gaze was distant, thoughtful, and tinged with an urgency that suggested knowledge far beyond their immediate peril. "There are forces beyond this system," Kale said quietly. "Entities who see Sithra IX as a key to unlocking powers long thought lost. They will come, drawn by the heart's awakening. We must unlock the vault's full potential, not to wield it blindly, but to understand and control it before it controls us." Plans were drawn with care and haste, expeditions organized to delve deeper into the vault's labyrinthine depths. Teams were trained to navigate the treacherous tunnels, to disable or bypass the ancient defenses, and to recover the lost technologies that could turn the tide. Elira and Jalen would lead the most perilous missions, their bond forged in the crucible of shared hardship and tempered by unspoken trust. The nights grew colder, shadows lengthening as whispers of impending invasion spread like wildfire among the survivors. Strange phenomena began to ripple through the outpost machines, flickering inexplicably, voices heard in empty corridors, and fleeting glimpses of figures moving beyond the edge of vision. The vault was awakening in ways they could not fully comprehend, and the price of awakening became ever clearer. One evening, Beneath a sky streaked with unnatural auroras, the outpost's sensors blared in alarm, a fleet of unknown ships breaking through the moon's atmosphere, sleek and silent, their designs unlike anything cataloged in Coalition archives. The Watchers had arrived. The true enemy. Elira stood shoulder to shoulder with her people as the ships descended, their cold eyes fixed on the heart of the oasis and the fragile sanctuary that dared to protect it. The desert winds howled, carrying the promise of a storm that would test every ounce of courage, every thread of hope. The rising storm was here. The shadow fleet loomed over Sithra, 9 like a dark prophecy, their sleek black hulls reflecting the eerie auroras that danced across the turbulent skies. Elira stood atop the fractured ridge, the cold desert wind tugging at her dust-streaked hair, her sapphire eyes blazing with fierce determination as the unknown ships cast their ominous silhouettes against the dawn. Around her, the survivors readied themselves, every hand gripping weapons forged from desperation and hope, every heart pounding with the weight of survival. The outpost was no longer just a refuge, it had become the last stand of a dying race and a testament to the stubborn will to endure. Jalen's voice came steady through the comlink, his fingers dancing across control panels in the command center below. The vault's ancient technology hummed in response, its power surging as if awakening to defend its own. Energy barriers shimmered along the perimeter, and automated sentinels sleek, towering constructs of unknown alloy and design activated, their glowing eyes scanning for threats with lethal precision. The very ground beneath their feet thrummed with power, a silent warning to all who dared approach. As the shadow ships began their descent, cutting through the dusty atmosphere with calculated precision, Elira felt a tremor of something deeper, a resonance from the heart of the oasis itself, pulsing in rhythmic harmony with the distant beating of her own heart. The vault was alive, its ancient will intertwined with theirs, bound by fate and blood to this forsaken moon. The battle erupted with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the outpost. Plasma beams lanced through swirling clouds of sand and smoke. Explosive charges rocked the tunnels, and the clash of metal against metal echoed like thunder across the barren plains. Elira fought with the ferocity of a mother protecting her young, every movement a blur of precision and desperation. Beside her, Jalen commanded the defenses with tactical brilliance, turning scavenged relics into weapons of war and hope. But the enemy was cunning and relentless. Their technology far surpassed anything the survivors had faced, adaptive and ruthless. Shadowy figures emerged from the ship's warriors clad in armor that seemed woven from darkness itself, their movements swift and merciless. The outpost defenders fell back under the weight of the assault, their numbers thinning, their hope flickering like a candle in the wind. In the heart of the chaos, Elira reached the vault's core chamber, the pulsing orb of energy, the heart glowing brighter than ever. She placed her hands upon its crystalline surface, feeling a surge of power ripple through her veins, a connection that transcended species and time. Visions flooded her mind, ancient battles, lost worlds, and the promise of renewal. The heart was not just a source of energy, it was a sentient force, a guardian of life itself. Drawing strength from this bond, Elira raised her voice, a clarion call that echoed through the tunnels and beyond. The vault responded, unleashing a wave of energy that cascaded through the outpost, sweeping away enemies and healing the wounded. The tide of battle turned. With renewed vigor, the survivors rallied, pushing back the invaders with a determination that defied their battered bodies and weary souls. Jalen's sharpshooters picked off enemy commanders, while Elira led the charge, her blade blazing with the light of the heart. The shadow fleet faltered, their assaults losing coordination as the ancient power of the vault reclaimed its dominion. As the last of the shadow warriors retreated, the skies cleared, revealing a dawn painted with hues of hope and renewal. The survivors gathered amidst the ruins, their faces marked by scars but illuminated by triumph. Elira knelt beside her children, their smiles faint but genuine, the hunger finally abated. The battle for Sithra, 9 had been won, but the legacy of the vault and the promise it held was only beginning. Across the stars, whispers of the awakened heart spread, drawing allies and enemies alike. Elira and Jalen stood united, guardians of a fragile future forged in the crucible of sacrifice and love. Under the twin moons, the desert no longer seemed a tomb, but a cradle where life could bloom again, against all odds. And somewhere, far beyond the dying light of Sithra, 9, the galaxy held its breath. Because the widow's plea had been answered,